Florida Senator Marco Rubio said on CBS Face the Nation, there is no question how important the Saudis are to American interests abroad.
Saudi Arabia is an important part of our Middle Eastern strategy. They are a key leverage and hedge point against Iranian influence in the region.
But there is bipartisan sentiment against allowing a multi-billion-dollar arms deal if the disappearance and possible death of Jamal Khashoggi is linked to Saudi leaders.
The kingdom threatening to retaliate against any sanctions. State-run news agencies say the kingdom and Turkey are working together to determine what happened. Florida Governor Rick Scott surveying damage in the Panhandle area from a Category 4 hurricane, Michael.
I met a guy that he was right on the beach, and he stayed. He had a motel there, and he stayed. He said he had one customer that wouldn't leave, and so he stayed. He said he'll never do it again. He had no idea what storm surge was like. He said he got sucked out and got pushed back in.
Authorities say about 80% of cell service is restored. President Trump rallying to help GOP candidates as the midterm elections approach.
The president and GOP leaders are optimistic that they could pick up a seat or two in the Senate. This next week, the president is holding rallies in 3 states with some of the closest Senate races in the country: Montana, Arizona, and Nevada, where the races are all tied or within just a few points. Republicans currently hold 2 of those tightly contested seats, though, in Nevada and Arizona. So while they are confident about holding on to the Senate, at this point, it is by no means a sure thing.
Fox's Garrett Tenney. The Lyric Opera of Chicago says musicians approved a multi-year labor deal ending a strike. The season will resume on Wednesday. This is Fox News.
We're surrounded by sound. There are sounds that you need to hear. There are sounds that you want to hear. And there are sounds that you long to hear.
I love you.
Hear it all, louder and clearer than ever before. If you or someone you know has a hard time hearing, Guam Hearing Doctors can help, using state-of-the-art test gear to evaluate your hearing and coming up with a plan to make your life better by making your hearing better. Call Guam Hearing Doctors for an appointment or visit them on the web at guamhearingdoctors.com.
Calvo started with a simple handshake. As we celebrate 80 years, we extend a hand to all of you who have taken our hand in trust, to the dreamers and realists, the families, the businesses, the young at heart and the old souls, our manumku and our children. From all of us to all of you, our deepest, happiest, and infinite thanks.
80 years here for you. 80 years thanks to you. Calvo's Insurance, a legacy of trust.
A deadline in the war in Syria as the country's president bids to retake the last major rebel stronghold.
Russia and Turkey agreed a deal last month to create a buffer zone around the province of Idlib, where President Trump has warned Syria and its backer, Russia, against launching what he described as a reckless attack. Under the terms of the accord, jihadist fighters and rebel forces must go on the inside of the zone, and Syrian government fighters would be on the outside. Jihadists have until today to withdraw from the buffer. If the deal collapses, aid agencies are warning of a humanitarian catastrophe. Simon Owen, Fox News.
A United Nations report says a 45% decrease in emissions is needed by 2030. Larry Kudlow, the director of the Trump administration's National Economic Council, on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, was asked if the president plans to do anything.
I'm not denying any climate change issues, George. I'm just saying, do we know precisely, and I mean worth modeling, things like how much of it is man-made, how much of it is solar, how much of it is oceanic, how much of it is rainforest, and other issues.
Kudlow says damage concerns are overestimated. The Los Angeles Rams remain undefeated with a victory in Denver.
Running back Todd Gurley rushed for a career-high 208 yards. The Rams down the Broncos 23-20. Gurley scored twice. He leads the league in touchdowns with 11. Elsewhere, the Dolphins got by the Bears 31-28. Jason Sanders booted a 47-yard field goal in overtime. Antonio Brown scored with 10 seconds remaining in the fourth quarter. The Steelers topped the Bengals 28-21. And Minnesota's Adam Thielen recorded his 6th straight 100-yard receiving game. The Vikings defeated Arizona 27-17. Bob Mortale, Fox News.
A possible swan song for an American icon, Sears files for bankruptcy. I'm Ann Carrick. This is Fox News.
Hey, what's that?
Oh,
It's a Subway Big Hot Pastrami.
My Big Hot Pastrami?
No, back up. My Subway Big Hot Pastrami. Get your own.
Get your own Subway Big Hot Pastrami. Tender, juicy beef on freshly baked bread. Enjoy yours with mustard and pickles. Get a Big Hot Pastrami at your favorite Subway location. It's so good you won't want to share. For a limited time only, Subway. Make it what you want.
Tall Tales is brought to you by Sanford Technology Group, STG, delivering service that can't be beat.
If you can dream uncommon design and unprecedented engineering, you define the 2018 Lexus. The boldly designed IS Sports Sedan's aggressive design stimulates the senses.
Advanced paddle shifting puts the exhilarating performance of the IS Sports Sedan at your fingertips. With deep, luxurious seating, the ES350 offers an ultimate level of comfort, while cutting-edge engineering delivers a thrilling drive.
Put yourself in a 2018 Lexus.
Now with special incentives.
At Atkins Kroll.
Call the experts at Guam Hearing Doctors if you're worried about your hearing. The evaluation is simple and painless.
Guam Regional Medical City. We bring the healthcare advances of the world directly to you. We are an acute care hospital that complements your needs with our robust outpatient specialty clinics. From preventative care to critical care, we strive for consistent excellence at GRMC. Our core philosophy is where patients are partners, which means we work as a team to make a healthier version of you. For more information about GRMC, visit us at grmc.gu.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So long as I got anything to say about it anyhow, because that's one of the things that we hold in high esteem here on Tall Tales, the right to keep and bear arms. Don't care too much for Mr. Justice Antonin Scalia's inability to read the word militia in the Second Amendment, and we know that some of our international radio listening audience and Facebookers perhaps read the Second Amendment a little bit longer than the orthodox view that prevails here on Tall Tales, but Tall Tales is an extremely egalitarian place. So we have enough room here for just about every possible viewpoint on just about any subject, so long as it's conservative. No, I didn't mean that. Just about any kind of viewpoint. And certainly we can be tolerant of others' views of the proper meaning of the Second Amendment. So here we are again. It's been a tough weekend. I'll tell you, 2 days without Tall Tales is just about as much as I can bear. Those long weekends, like Labor Day or something like that, are pretty tough on me, because after about 5 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, I start the Jones for Tall Tales, and I notice our Carl here is asking, can't we do Tall Tales on Saturday and Sunday? And I'd have to say that I could probably be persuaded to do it. With respect to the real Joe Cruz, real Joe Cruz is able to put his head down behind the screen back there in the control room, so
I'm looking out for the fire that's coming.
all I can see is the top of his head. So I guess that almost prompts the harder question: is it possible to have Tall Tales without the real Joe Cruz? It's been done before, but it's not easy. It's a hard gig. So here we are, back again on Tall Tales after having suffered through a long weekend with no Tall Tales. And, of course, I want to welcome back, as Inspector Reno would say in the movie Casablanca, the usual suspects, Juanita Machi. welcome back.
Welcome back.
Juanita Machi, Linda Gabriel, our Carl Bora Nelson, Rico Blancafor, Shelley Gibson, Brad Hewitt, Ismael Velez, Lynn and Vince Bora Polino. So we've got a quorum here. So I guess we could, you got your gavel handy there? Let's call this Tall Tales to order, Real Joe Cruz. Calling Tall Tales to order on the, let's see, what day is today? It is the 15th of October in 2018, and it is also in the political calendar. It is Glock 70 plus 28. Can you believe that? It's been 28 days since the Attorney General finally did something to deal with the Glock party that occurred on the 7th of July. So as is our usual custom, we'll start out here with the Daily News, Tall Tales. Daily News is, you know, they must have had a good weekend. They must have rested up, sharpened their pencils, and actually wrote an editorial that's something other than a news story recast as an editorial or something guaranteed to make everyone but me feel good. And the title is Our View, Airport Fails at Transparency. Make documents public. Well, if there's a word that makes us feel good here on Tall Tales, it is indeed transparency, because we're looking for transparency everywhere in our government, especially any part of the government that is operated by a board or commission or a parliamentary body like the legislature. I don't know if Fernando Esteves is probably not. He's probably not a Tall Tales fan. He's somewhat selective when it comes to media. He boycotted the Post early in his term, and since we kind of have a working relationship with the Post, perhaps that boycott would spill over to Tall Tales. But Fernando didn't believe in transparency. He thought that he could take a black marker and mark up documents that were public documents if he had a better idea than what the law provided. But as the saying goes, that was then, this is now. So we're talking about the Daily News editorial. And they say one of the critical components of a representative democracy is openness and transparency to the people. Well, that's a nice sentiment, but I don't know where that comes from. I don't know if that is a critical component of a democracy or not. We, meaning a lot of folks, get into the habit of saying anything is good must be democracy, and anything that's not good must be anti-democratic. Not paying attention to what democracy, what the meaning of that word is. And it's a couple of Greek words, demo, people, and krasi, government of. So a democracy is a government of the people. And what the working definition, the everyday definition is that in order to have a democracy, you have an elected government. But an elected government can be just as tyrannical as a dictatorship. So the fact that you have a democracy doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be transparency, etc. I think if I were writing that sentence, rather than saying one of the critical components of a representative democracy is openness and transparency to the people, I would use something like popular or acceptable. One of the critical components of a popular, meaning the people, or acceptable government is openness and transparency to the people. But given that they're in the newspaper business, sometimes the Daily News doesn't strike me as being super accurate with their use of vocabulary. The editorial goes on to say the government has an obligation to ensure that its information is public, except in rare circumstances such as national security. Okay? There are laws that clearly spell out what is and isn't public information, such as the Open Government Law, or how about the so-called Freedom of Information Law, which is really the Sunshine Reform Act of 1999. Yet the Guam International Airport Authority has clearly flouted the law and wants to continue to do so. In 2015, DFS asked the airport to provide copies of transcripts of its executive sessions. Executive session transcripts become public documents after 6 months unless a judge agrees to keep those transcripts sealed. Now, let me stop here. If an executive agency goes into an executive session, and there are only limited reasons that they can go into an executive session, and it's a little bit more complicated than just mumbling the words, oh, it's a personnel matter. The employment or dismissal of a public employee, hearing complaints about a public employee, matters dealing with the Public Employee Management Relations Act, and conversation with the Attorney General or Chief of Police about matters of public safety, or matters dealing with litigation, pending litigation, or possible litigation, allows the board or commission to bring its lawyer into executive session so that he could provide legal counsel to that board or commission in executive session. But if that's the case, then the counsel has to sign a certificate that the matter should be heard in executive session, and provision has to be made to transcribe that entire session, and however it's recorded must be transcribed, and no one can get at it for 6 months. And then before the expiration of 6 months, for good cause shown, the agency can petition the court to hold on to that transcript and not make it available to others in accordance with the court order. So if you stop and think about it, you could understand the rationale here behind that particular provision. And what it means is that that's the reason you bring your lawyer, a board brings its lawyer into executive session. You don't bring him into every executive session because he's got a great sense of humor, or she has a really nice personality or something like that. There has to be that litigation dimension. Now, there is the attorney-client privilege, which is key to any advice that a lawyer gives to a client. And the attorney-client privilege means that the attorney cannot be forced to divulge what he told his client if it's covered by the attorney-client privilege. And the reason for that is that in order to properly counsel a client, the thinking is that whatever counsel the lawyer gives has to be kept confidential. As an example, get your Law and Order notebooks out here. You got that Law and Order? Yeah, get your Law and Order notebooks out there. There you go. So if Jack is prosecuting your client, you know, you're going to, unlike the way they do it on TV, you're going to sit down with your client and say, well, what's going on? What really happened? And your client has the ability to say, yeah, I killed her. I've hated her guts all my life. I saw the chance to do it, and I could get away with it, so I'd done it, right? And no one can force the lawyer to repeat what the client told him. Now, there are a couple of hooks on here. A lawyer has the privilege of privileged conversation so long as he is defending somebody for something he has already done. But that privilege can't extend to helping somebody commit a violation of the law or crime. For instance, the same thing, and the guy says, you know, I'd really like to kill my wife because I've wanted to divorce her, but it's too much trouble. And I was just wondering, what do you think the best way for me to do it so that you could defend me when that character named Jack McCoy comes after me on Law and Order. Lawyer cannot counsel a violation of the law. So that's kind of the background going into this. The reason that the lawyer can come into the executive session, what must be done when the lawyer's there, and the non-disclosure of the communication between the board and the lawyer, which would be privileged under the attorney-client privilege. And if it weren't for that, then a lawyer probably would never be able to give counsel to the board or commission, which some people would say, well, that'd be great. It'd save us a lot of money. But it probably wouldn't work very well under our legal system. So we go on with the editorial here. Executive session transcripts become public documents after 6 months unless a judge agrees to keep those documents, as you were, those transcripts sealed. But the airport got Superior Court Judge Michael Berdallo to reseal the documents years after they became public record. And it argued to the Supreme Court of Guam that the documents should be kept sealed because it would put the court at a disadvantage in its ongoing legal battle with DFS. Well, that would be kind of the smaller part of the problem. It's hard to say exactly what would come out of those transcripts. Going on, when we made the request for those documents, they were public. DFS attorney J. Srinivasan argued to justices, if a document becomes public, it remains public. And then the next heading here, the next subheading, violating core principles of our democracy. Well, I already spoke to that up above, but the airport could have kept the transcript sealed by following the open government law, but it failed to do so within the required time period, and those documents then became public record. Superior Court of Guam Judge Anita Sokola confirmed that when she ruled that the airport broke the law when it failed to provide the executive session transcripts to DFS. Sealing records by law that are public is wrong, and it violates the core principles of our democracy. You know, I gotta get a hold of the Daily News and find out where they found reference to those core principles of our democracy, because we've only had an open government law and a sunshine law for about the last 25 years. But we've had democracy here since 1950. I suppose it was, maybe it was a coreless democracy, kind of like some people, before they eat an apple, they'll get one of those snazzy little knives and cut the core out of the middle of the apple. I don't think we had a coreless democracy then. I think we're just dealing with some rather bombastic language on the part of the Daily News. And then the editorial goes on to say public officials aren't allowed to retroactively make public information secret, to hide it away from the community just because they think what's in those documents could hurt an agency. Guam airport officials failed to follow the law. They didn't take appropriate steps to keep the executive session transcripts sealed. Their attempt to cover their failure by getting the transcripts retroactively sealed is clear violation of Guam's open government law and flouts Eddie Calvo's promise of an open and transparent government. It's clear that the airport executive session transcripts are public documents and that they must be released to any party who requests them. Well, there's something there. You know, the open government law is not just for government officials. It's supposed to be for all of us citizens in this democracy. But there's an awful lot at stake here. You know, Judge Berdallo ruled that the papers are sealed. and Judge Sokola said that they must be disclosed. Both cases are before the Supreme Court right now, and I think it was on Friday that when I discussed that matter, and pointed out that the Supreme Court is going to hear both those appeals and consolidate them, and there will be a single ruling on both the appeals. So I can see a real problem here. I understand what the Daily News is saying, and I would consider myself something of a champion of the open government law and of the Sunshine Reform Act, being one who is really in favor of open government, being a member of the Fourth Estate and having paid a lot of attention to what Joe Cruz, the real Joe Cruz, says about active and how does that go, real Joe Cruz?
Active and informed citizenship, it's not just a right, it's a duty.
Okay, yeah, thanks for reminding me of that, real Joe. So, but here's something else. Now, this is an extremely complicated case and a heavy-duty case. Big bucks riding on this. Potentially reputations are riding on it. You know that there is a criminal indictment against a man named S.K. Lee in Korea who allegedly gave Lotte inside information to somebody from DFS. DFS has denied that, but according to the news reports, an email trail shows that that's exactly what happened. So we have a lot of lawyering going on. The airport has a lawyer, DFS has a lawyer, and Lotte has a lawyer. And then to further complicate matters, there has apparently been a grand jury impaneled, possibly to deal with all of this, and the grand jury has subpoenaed the lawyers for both DFS and Lotte to come before it and bring documents. And that was something of a rug because there's a court order saying you can't show these documents to anybody. And then there's a grand jury subpoena saying you got to bring these documents in. So without even speculating on what those transcripts would show, I could see a huge desire on the part of the airport's attorneys to not have those transcripts disclosed. You know, I would speculate on this. Perhaps, you know, a suspicious mind would say, well, they don't want those transcripts to be exposed because it would put the airport and their lawyers in an extremely bad light, especially given the fact that there are criminal charges pending. I'll come back to this right after we finish with this short break, and then we'll pick up on taxpayers should not fund legal arguments on the plebiscite.
I'm John Gibson. This is My Word. In 1968, artist Andy Warhol was at the height of his career. His pop art paintings were worth millions. His underground film studio, The Factory, was the center of the New York scene, and he had dozens of celebrities and devotees and hangers-on around him at all times. One of those hangers-on was crazy. Her name was Valerie Solana, and she harbored a paranoid grudge that Warhol had stolen her script for a play. In fact, he just lost it. But Solana came to Warhol's studio with the intent to kill him. And she very nearly did. She shot Warhol 2 times. The bullets tore up his lungs, his spleen, his liver, his stomach. He was briefly declared dead, but doctors did manage to save him. He spent 2 agonizing months in the hospital recovering, and he had to wear a surgical corset the rest of his life to hold his organs in place. But in a way, the 2 bullets did kill Warhol. It just took another 19 years. Because of the trauma of the shooting and the hospitalization, Warhol had a severe aversion to hospitals. When in 1987 he finally submitted to a long overdue surgery, he had a heart attack in surgery and died. Doctors believe if he had not been so afraid of hospitals and submitted to the surgery earlier when it was first recommended, he would have survived. I'm John Gibson. That's my word.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training every morning on The Ray Gibson Show.
Are you right now not as successful as you think you should be or could be? I'm Jerry Roberts, and at 7:20 a.m. on The Ray Gibson Show, we'll talk about what to do about that.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point by Jerry Roberts at guamtraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts on The Ray Gibson Show on 93.3 The Point.
And now back to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the one radio show politicians don't want you to listen to. Call now, 888-TALK. That's 888-8255.
So let me take a peek at my Facebook comments here. Unfortunately, my iPad is giving me a problem with Facebook today. My iPad is the only place that I can get a hold of the older Facebook comments. On my laptop here, I get about 4 or 5, and as the new ones come in, it pushes the old ones off the bottom, and I can't get at them. My iPad's giving me a lot of problems today here, but I did see out of the corner of my eye a post from Jesse Lujan asking about national security, and I didn't have the ability to read the entire question, so if it comes up again, I'll stop what I'm doing and read that question before it gets away from me. In the meantime, A. Camacho asks if it was public record, copies were floating around, I would guess, so they were sealed again. Would it be illegal to own them or have them in possession if they were sealed again? And my horseback opinion would be no, it would not be illegal, or it would not be a violation of a court order to own them if they were, as you say, floating around again. Because I would think that once they have become public and released, both practically and legally, it's like trying to put the genie back in the jug. Pretty hard to do. Somewhere between very difficult and impossible. Apparently in this case, although the documents were no longer to be held confidentially, no one got around to asking for the documents. And since Duty Free didn't ask for them, you know, it's kind of a case of if you were to walk into the courtroom back there where the switches are kept, you'd find a couple of people asleep at the switch there and kind of let these opportunities get away from them in a sense. So that would be my my answer to that one, A. So I guess to wrap this up, I think it would really put a judge in a difficult position to, it would not be one of the easier rulings to come before a judge. Now, in an earlier report, it was mentioned that the airport just went to Judge Judge Berdallo without notifying the other parties, and got Judge Berdallo to reseal these papers. And Judge Berdallo didn't examine the papers in camera. Once again, reference to your Law and Order notebook, when the phrase "in camera" is used, it doesn't mean that thing that's a part of your iPhone, What it means is that the judge reviews the papers privately. And oftentimes when there are disputes about the releasability of documents, a judge would examine those papers in camera to see what the impact of releasing them would be. So in this particular case, I would think that somewhere along the line, someone ought to examine the papers in camera, because even if duty-free is correct on the law that that once the time limit had expired, there's no reason to keep the papers confidential. I mean, to keep the transcript confidential, if that transcript contains something that is so momentous as to bring about a poor result in the case, and a judge probably would be able to find some authority somewhere in the stack of law books that every judge has that would allow him to keep those papers confidential. So it may very well be that the Supreme Court issues an equivocation for a ruling saying that these papers should be released unless one of the two judges involved, after an in-camera examination of the papers, decides that to do so would cause, you know, fill in the blank there, horrible problems, irreparable harm, an extreme injury to the territory, whatever. That is a possibility. I'm not going to label it as one of Bob's predictions here, but it is certainly a possibility. Okay, so the next editorial here is still playing with Facebook here in my iPad to see if I can get it work the way it should. Having a little trouble with it. This is the Post editorial. Taxpayers should not fund legal arguments on plebiscite. And it reads, Gov Guam's arguments for such plebiscite that will exclude thousands of voters simply because they are not native inhabitants of Guam should not be made at the expense of all of Guam's taxpayers. Last year, U.S. District Court Chief Judge Francis Tydenko Gatewood struck down Guam's plebiscite law that restricts voting on Guam's future political status exclusively to those who qualify as, quote, native inhabitants of Guam. The federal judge ruled the exclusivity is racially biased and violates the U.S. Constitution's Equal Protection Clause. The proposed plebiscite would disqualify the majority of Guam residents who don't meet the definition of native inhabitants of Guam. The U.S. Justice Department has stated that definition, those who gained U.S. citizenship in 1950 through the Organic Act, is racially biased because the majority, 98.6% of the people who gained citizenship were racially Chamorro. Now, if Booney Dog Chamorro is listening, and he claims he can't get back on Facebook, if he is listening, and there is a difference between ethnicity and race, but I think popularly in discussions like this, race kind of removes ethnicity from the vocabulary. So for a conversation like this, it's appropriate to say that Chamorro is a race, even though it may for some people be an ethnicity that is only partially connected to that person's racial identity. So the magic number here is 98.6. The government of Guam, using public funds, appealed the judge's decision, arguments were heard in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and the arguments were heard last week in Hawaii. After having attended the hearing, Attorney General Elizabeth Barrett Anderson voiced optimism that the government's arguments would prevail, saying ancestry should not be viewed in Guam's case as a pretext to racial discrimination because that was not the intent of the law, nor is there evidence to support such contention. Boy. This is another one, kind of like the Chamorro Land Trust Act, and if a person were to stand up in public and say, I favor the so-called plebiscite because it doesn't measure Chamorro self-determination, no one would support that person because it's everybody knows that the reason that we want to do it is, I will repeat some of the usual arguments. Chamorros have never had the right of self-determination. The Chamorros have always been a colonized people, and it's time that the Chamorros had the ability to choose their own destiny. I mean, these are standard lines that you hear from the nationalistas on this particular subject. So to say that ancestry in this case is not, what did Elizabeth say? It's not racial discrimination because that's not the intent of the law. Well, you go back and look at the genesis of the law and how the law was amended after the decision in Rice versus Cayetano, because in the beginning we didn't talk in terms of native inhabitants and ancestry. We talked in terms of Chamorros. So the statute remained the same, but we changed the language to make it perhaps a little bit more difficult to attack in a judicial setting. A person who is eligible for Chamorro land, who has Chamorro Land Trust land, is automatically registered in the plebiscite registry, etc. So, you know, there may be good arguments in favor of the so-called plebiscite, but Elizabeth, that doesn't happen to be one of them. Now, just a little bit of background here. In Rice versus Cayetano, there's also an attempted use of ancestry as a proxy for race. And here is an example of ancestry being used as a proxy for race. In other words, a statute that would talk not in terms of black or white or brown or red or whatever, or Chamorro or black or Native American or Haole, anything like that. It would talk only in terms of ancestry. And in the post-Civil War era of the United States, when the Democrats in the southern parts of the United States were just figuring out how to go about Jim Crow laws, one of the provisions that they employed was a literacy test, that everyone who came to the polls to vote had to pass a literacy test, you know, like reading, writing, spelling, stuff like that. And if you couldn't pass the literacy test, you couldn't vote. And I suppose I could get on the right side of something like that. We would hope that people are a little bit literate to know a little bit about what's going on when they come to vote. But I can't really warm up to that very much, because whether a person can read or write, the decisions that the government make are still going to affect him. So this was a ruse. It was a pretext to say that if you can't read and write, you can't vote. Well, after the Civil War, after a lifetime of slavery, how many former slaves do you think could read and write? During the slavery era, it was against the law in a lot of the states to teach a slave how to read. So to say that only those who could read and write could vote, an obvious attempt, successful attempt to keep former slaves from voting. But in the post-Civil War South, there were plenty of white folks that couldn't read and write either. And, of course, we wanted them to be able to vote. So how could we come up with something that allowed the white folks to vote but keep the black folks from voting at all? And the answer was grandfather clauses. And that to me is like federal and national government. It's a phrase that I never use unless I have to use it to make a point on what someone else said. It's not a good phrase, because this is what a grandfather clause was. Everyone had to take the literacy test except people whose grandfathers voted, right? Well, the grandfathers would have been old enough to have voted before the Civil War. And, of course, none of the slaves had grandfathers who voted before the Civil War. So this was just a couple of pretexts to keep black folks from voting and make sure that everybody else could vote. So when I hear people in serious conversation saying, well, can't we put a grandfather clause in that? If I can, I politely say there's probably a better way of describing what we want to do than to use that actually sinister phrase, grandfather clause. But the reason I went into that is you could see that this idea of ancestry, that a person whose grandfather voted, the descendants of someone whose grandfather voted could vote in an election, is a classic case of ancestry being a proxy for race. And that's part of the holding in the Ninth Circuit when Guam lost. That's part of the holding, that ancestry is a proxy for race. Now, I talked about this before. When the case went before Judge Gatewood the first time, she ruled against Davis, saying that, one, the case was not ripe because there was no saying that the plebiscite would ever be held, and two, the question was not, in effect, a real question, because if the plebiscite were conducted, it would have no legal effect. It was just a glorified public opinion poll, and the results would be sent off to the Secretary General of the UN, the Congress, the President, the Governor, Snow White, half the dwarfs, etc., but it wouldn't change the law. But the Ninth Circuit majority opinion came back and said, well, if that's the case, the Congress may very well treat that as the position of the territory of Guam. So when Davis was denied his ability to register for that plebiscite, he was injured and he is standing to raise the issue. So I hope I can finish this up before the big halftime show that we have at 5 o'clock every day, because I've got CLTC and the GEC, Tenorio and LG versus unborn children, Tom Fisher versus LG and the Attorney General. We got a pretty interesting card coming up, so we'll see how it goes.
Grilled salmon, petite sirloin. Can't decide.
What are you doing?
Making my top 10 list of favorite dishes at Ruby Tuesday.
You really need to get a hobby.
But I can't decide. There's no way I can narrow down so many classic dishes to just 10.
Then it's a good thing Ruby Tuesday did it for you.
It's the all-time favorites menu at Ruby Tuesday Guam. We took our most popular dishes and put them on one great menu for only $14.99. Hickory pork chop, Parmesan shrimp pasta, prime loco moco. 10 top sellers at one great price. Pick your favorite for a limited time at Ruby Tuesday Guam.
So here we are back again already, and I've got Donna Mila Taitano online. Welcome. Pierre Tarin from Narita, part of our international radio listening audience. And I guess I gave a good answer for A, so thank you, A. And Lee Stolley is here. So moving on, again, with this editorial, there's a lot of meat here. So the Ninth Circuit ruled against the government of Guam and ruled in Davis's favor and remanded it back to the district court. And the arguments that have been raised this time around in the district court, as far as I can tell, don't look like winners. It looked like just a rehashing of the arguments that were advanced before. And when the Ninth Circuit ruled that the mere fact that Davis couldn't register was an injury giving him standing, it looked to me like we had a really hard row to hoe. So I go along with this editorial for a couple reasons. One is what I've just explained. I see it as a flawed legal theory. And then second, I've said more than once that I would be curious to, well, let me back up a second. Second reason is this, that, again, there's a misunderstanding here. People think that this plebiscite that we've never had and may never have is to determine what the political status of Guam is going to be. That's not what it's about. It's what the purpose of the plebiscite is to determine what Chamorros think the plebiscite should be. And then we've been hoodwinked into thinking that there are only three choices available. Statehood, which in my mind is not, it's theoretically possible, but that's about it. Free association, which is not possible for a territory of the United States. And independence, which is really what all of the activity is about, because our so-called Commission on Decolonization is really the commission on the Chamorro Commission on Independence for Guam. That's all that's going on. That's the purpose of it, and I'm frankly not fooled. So, you know, if you look at the gamesmanship theory of doing things, if you put out three choices, and one of them's, and both of them are basically impossible, and you tell people this is what you can vote for, well, what are you going to wind up with? You're going to wind up with independence, and it to me is ironic that a group that is so assertive when it comes to the right to voice its own opinions and choose its own destiny would go to the United Nations and the Fourth Committee, countries like China and Iran and Venezuela, etc., and think that this is the way to do it, and would bind itself to choices that the people here have not made. If you want to know what the people here want, then don't limit it to the three choices. And even if you want to limit it to Chamorros, I mean, even if that's the desire to find out what Chamorros want, there have to be more than the three choices that we've been shoehorned into. So that's the second reason that I agree with this editorial. But the third reason is probably the most important reason, and that is that I've said more than once, I would be a little curious to find out what those of Chamorro ethnicity would desire for their political status. I'm just not so sure that I want to pay for it. And it seems to me that it's a non-governmental function that I don't remember from anything that I ever read, that in the independence of the United States, the people in the colonies petitioned Parliament for money to conduct an educational campaign about independence, and that's kind of the tilt that we're putting on it here. So we spent a lot of money on the Chamorro Commission for Independence, and we've spent some money on this case already, and we're going to spend more because when we lose, and I'm not saying if we lose, when we lose, we're not only paying our own attorney's fees, but we're going to wind up paying Davis's attorney's fees. And he's obviously got some pretty high-powered lawyers there. The story that ran on the 12th in the Post, where Elizabeth Anderson was gushing over the wonderful job that Julian Uggan had done before the Ninth Circuit. The story winds up like this. There's an interview of Christian Adams, who was Davis's attorney in the first round of cases, not this time, but the first time, and has been on the phone a couple of times on Tall Tales, so he's not a stranger to Tall Tales. So with respect to Christian Adams, when asked if he was surprised by the amount of money spent to fight this case, Adams replied, "I'm glad I'm not a taxpayer on Guam. It's going to get worse. The bills that are being accumulated in this easy question are astounding." So how much time have we spent talking about how little money we have and how we must economize, conserve, consolidate, etc.? I think in this particular case, we're throwing good money after bad, and I think the reason we're doing it is more a matter of, I'm going to use the P word here, pride. Elizabeth Barrett Anderson and the folks in the legislature are saying, we're not going to let them push us around. We'll appeal it. We'll take it all the way to the Supreme Court. In other words, a great exercise of bluff conduct. So I've got to give one of these two the coveted blue star today. And I'd have to say that although I quibbled a little bit with the Daily News's use of vocabulary, nothing new there, they did zero in on an important public issue, which is the transparency of government operations. I think that they are perhaps a little trigger happy on the result that should obtain in that particular case. And I think I explained why I think they're a little trigger happy. But nonetheless, it is an edgy, gritty editorial that talks about stuff that we really need to talk about and think about. And as far as the Post editorial is concerned, pretty good also. So I think today is one of those rare days when I'm going to expend a little extra ink and perhaps more generosity than I should, but here's the Post, here's the Daily News. So this has happened before, where I gave each of them the blue star, and you'll recall a couple of times I gave both of them a 0, and one time I said that that the lukewarm nature of the editorials was such that I wasn't even going to do Zemi Kotny. I was going to go straight to the card. So that's it for Zemi Kotny, and the real Joe Cruz is taking us back to Carmen's Boogie again. Good music, Real Joe. And after that big halftime show we have every day here at 5, you know, the marching bands, the cheerleaders, the drill team, the synchronized card section in the grandstand, the fire eaters. We're going to add sword swallowers too, aren't we, Real Joe?
Yes, sir.
Maybe next week.
Sounds good.
Yeah, maybe next week we'll do that. And then, of course, at the end of the big halftime show, we always have that barrage of cannon fire, so I'll see you after the show.
point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Calls for the White House to reconsider an arms deal with Saudi Arabia. I'm Ann Carrick, Fox News. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle concerned about the disappearance of a journalist.
Until the U.S. knows what happened to Jamal Khashoggi, Democrats and Republicans in Congress say they'll push a vote to scrap a $110 billion arms sale to the Saudis. Florida Republican Senator Marco Rubio on CBS Face the Nation said even implying the arms deal is still on the table is not good.
There's not enough money in the world for us to buy back our credibility on human rights if we do not move forward and take swift action on this.
Saudi leaders have denied any involvement in any harm that may have befallen Khashoggi. The president said there would be severe punishment, but stopped short of calling off the arms deal. Gernal Scott, Fox News.
Could it be the end for an American icon? Sears files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, buckling under massive debt and staggering losses. The question now, can a smaller Sears be viable? The reorganization is expected to have rippling effects. The operator of Kmart and Sears already closing hundreds of locations and putting other famous brands on the block as it burns through money and sees customers abandon its stores. Sears joins a growing list of retailers declaring bankruptcy or liquidating in the last 2 years. Recovery continues in Florida and other states after Hurricane Michael. FEMA Director Brock Long.
We've got a long way to go. The hardest mission is going to be not just life sustainment, getting thousands of people out of shelters into more suitable living conditions, but ultimately there's going to be a tough long-term housing mission that lies ahead. It's going to take many months.
The director and Governor Rick Scott surveying damage in the Florida Panhandle. President Trump scheduled to visit both Florida and Georgia today. This is Fox News.
For over 30 years, Sanford Technology Group has been helping companies throughout Guam and Micronesia with their payroll, time and attendance, networking, and other information technology services. Our online integrated payroll and time and attendance solution provides the workforce management tools and expertise to make your business more efficient and employee-friendly. For more information, visit Sanford Technology at 335 South Marine Corps Drive or call us at 647-0220 to schedule a demo today.
Sanford Technology Group.
A new government report says low-income people in states that have not expanded Medicaid are more likely to forego needed medical care. The study from the Government Accountability Office finds nearly 20% passed up needed care because of costs, more than double the number compared to states that did expand service under the Affordable Care Act. Medicaid expansion is an issue from Utah to Georgia as Election Day nears. Democratic Senator Ron Wyden requested the report. He says it provides the most detailed look yet at real-world differences. Republican Jeff Flake of Arizona is retiring from the Senate this year. He shares his predictions for the midterm elections on ABC's This Week.
I think that Republicans need to provide that check. That's what our system of government does. And I hope that they can without a change in who controls Congress. But I think that may be coming. If you believe the conventional wisdom, and I kind of do, the House will likely flip. The Senate will remain in Republican hands.
Flake says the Senate's bipartisan conduct on the Robert Mueller investigation could help retain Republican control of the Senate. A classic rivalry in the NFC wraps up Week 6 action in the NFL.
A conference clash coming up as part of Monday Night Football tonight with the Green Bay Packers set to play host to the San Francisco 49ers. The Packs struggling out of the gate at 2-2-1 so far, but receiver Randall Cobb says this team has the ability to right the ship.
We've had to fight for it, so that just goes to show the
resilience.
As for the 49ers, they're right now the cellar dwellers in the NFC West at 1-4 as defensive back Richard Sherman braces for the challenge of Green Bay quarterback Aaron Rodgers.
You got to be ready for the backyard football. He's a great passer and he can get the ball anywhere.
The 49ers and Packers will kick off at 8:15 p.m. Eastern Time from Lambeau Field. Matt Napolitano, Fox News.
I'm Ann Carrick, and this is Fox News.
If you can dream uncommon design and unprecedented engineering, you define the 2018 Lexus. The boldly designed IS Sport Sedan's aggressive design stimulates the senses.
Advanced paddle shifting puts the exhilarating performance of the IS Sport Sedan at your fingertips. With deep, luxurious seating, the ES350 offers an ultimate level of comfort, while cutting-edge engineering delivers a thrilling drive.
Put yourself in a 2018 Lexus.
Now with special incentives.
At Atkins Kroll.
Tall Tales is being brought to you by Sanford Technology Group, STG, delivering service that can't be beat.
Guam Regional Medical City. We bring the healthcare advances of the world directly to you. We are an acute care hospital that complements your needs with our robust outpatient specialty clinics. From preventative care to critical care, we strive for consistent excellence at GRMC. Our core philosophy is where patients are partners, which means we work as a team to make a healthier version of you. For more information about GRMC, visit us at grmc.gu.
Life is too short to be isolated from the people you love. Hearing loss is the invisible disability. The experts at Guam Hearing Doctors have solutions.
Meet all the candidates up close and personal and find out why they deserve your vote. On Saturday, October 27th, you can meet them face-to-face during Micronesia Mall's One-on-One with the candidates. From 1 to 4 p.m., you can ask the tough questions, exchange views, express your concerns, or just get to know your candidates better. Hosted by Ray Gibson and broadcast on 93.3 The Point. Go one-on-one with the candidates. Saturday, October 27th, only at Micronesia Mall.
Once again, another great halftime show here on Tall Tales, and it's been a while since I mentioned that if you were here for the beginning of that football game, when the national anthem is played, you see every single person in the stands standing proudly with his hand over his or her heart. You'd see every football player on the field standing and rendering the necessary courtesies to the national anthem. That's kind of the way it goes here, and not only at halftime on Tall Tales, but throughout the show. So we wrapped up Meet the Press just before the big halftime show. It was a long episode of Meet the Press, but credit to the newspapers, there was some meat in each of those editorials, so it took a little discussing, and I hope that those of you out there in our international radio listening audience enjoyed the discussions and the opportunities to make notations in your Law and Order notebooks. So we move now to the card, and I've got, as I said, I've got several items on the card. I've got CLTC versus stupidity. And I've got the GEC, Guam Election Commission, versus stupidity. Tenorio and Leon Guerrero versus unborn children. And that one is, the battle is joined there, folks. Tom Fisher versus Lou LG and the Attorney General. Doris versus Mike and Elizabeth Warren, better known as Pocahontas. And if you've been following that item on the card where Mike wants to turn parts of Guam into an Indian reservation, you'd understand what I'm saying. Loti versus DFS and the airport and the Attorney General, we kind of killed that one in Zemi-Kotny, so I probably won't spend much time on that. Hills versus Weir. This is another one of the things that Howard Hills has criticized Neil Weir on mercifully, this idea that if we just had the right argument and we presented it to the right person or the right court, that we could have some of the political rights that the states have. And in Weir's case, it doesn't cost the Treasury any money, but the latest thing on Weir is that his latest fundraising email was sent out. So I'll get into that a little bit if we get to that place on the list. And I've got one on the list here, Evelyn Duenas versus GRT. Evelyn Duenas is the lady who's privilege to ride on public transportation was suspended summarily for a week. And it's been a little while, and I haven't gotten down to it yet, but there's some interesting points there that I'm going to discuss no matter how long it takes. So starting out with the CLTC versus stupidity, you'll recall last week that Tom Atta squelched Frank Uggin's very well planned, very nicely developed plan to solve the entire CLTC scandal problem. Tom refused to hold an oversight hearing because Frank had asked him to hold an oversight hearing. When Tom said, "Well, why do you want to hold it?" and Frank says it's an urgent matter. Tom's response was, "Well, urgent because it's an election year." And I've got some intel that this has now become parts of domestic conversations. As an example, when one of the household members says to the other household member, "Don't you think you should take the garbage out now?" The appropriate response is, "Why? Because it's an election year?" So congratulations, Tom. You've added a new catchphrase to the local conversation here. So Frank introduced a very good bill to deal with that. It came on for public hearing on July 13th. Tom ditched the hearing, spiked the hearing, never rescheduled it, did absolutely nothing on the Chamorro Land Trust Commission scandal up until the commission investigated itself and came back and said, "Well, nobody did nothing wrong." So we want the legislature to validate all of the sweetheart deals, cronyism, and corruption that may have occurred, just do it in passing a couple of bills. So that was the last thing that came out of the Chamorro Land Trust Commission. Today, there was no exercise in stupidity, at least that made the papers, which means that the Chamorro Land Trust Commission probably didn't do anything. Which in their case is perhaps the most salutary activity they can engage in, not doing anything at all. Next on the list is GEC, Guam Election Commission versus stupidity. And on that one, as is my usual custom, I was listening to my very favorite morning radio talk show this morning, which is not only entertaining and informative, oftentimes it helps me a little bit with my show prep. What radio show do you suppose that would be, Real Joe Cruz?
I'm not sure, sir.
How about the Ray Gibson Show?
Of course.
You're playing hide the ball on me there, Real Joe Cruz. Yeah, it was the real Ray Gibson Show, right? And I heard Maria Pangolinin call in and field this question. If there were write-in votes for Frank Uggan and Alicia Olympiaco, and the write-ins occurred under both in both the Democrat and Republican columns, would the totals on each column be combined to come up with one vote? Maria said no, that wouldn't be how it worked. It would only be the Democrat votes that would count. And not long after that, Ken Leon Guerrero, who probably is more active in these matters than anybody on the Election Commission except for curious Ken Paris, who has taken to the airwaves to discuss things that that the Commission has said were confidential. Ken comes back and does something that's just not fair. He points to the law, and he quotes Section 1115 of Title III. If the write-in voting oval or other defined space provided is marked, a write-in vote shall be counted for the office under which it is marked, provided a name is written alongside the voting oval or other defined space shown. The write-in names appearing next to the marked write-in voting oval or other defined space provided that office shall be tabulated and published. So, it just seems to me, and when I heard Maria saying that, I said, that without even cracking a book, I said, that just doesn't sound right. We're not talking about a primary election. We're talking about a general election. And then I pondered a little bit, and I thought, why would someone who wants to do a write-in vote for governor have to vote in either column, either the Democrat column or the Republican column? That doesn't make sense. And then once again, Ken shows the ballot, and this was something we talked about before. Ken made a presentation to the Election Commission as to what the ballot ought to look like, and apparently the Election Commission went along with that. And under that, in that ballot, I'm looking at a picture of it here. On the left side, there is a column that says Democrat, Lou Leon Guerrero, etc. And then in the next column, it says Republican, Raymond S. Tenorio, etc. And then in the far right column, it says write-in. And it says there's a blank for governor and lieutenant governor. Makes eminent good sense to me, but according to the news as I followed it, after the Election Commission sort of committed itself to doing that at a meeting that no one apparently attended, they reversed themselves and came up with a ballot that doesn't have that third column. And the write-in, anyone putting a write-in candidate, putting forth a write-in candidate would have to do it under the Democrat column or the Republican column. And, of course, Curious Ken wrote a letter to the editor explaining why that should be. And here's what he says. The political parties have the right to request that the line for write-in candidates bear no party affiliation, as the electorate has identified who will represent the two political organizations. And then, contrary to claims by self-anointed election experts, this is Ken, the design of a three-column 2018 general election ballot was proposed not by any armchair political quarterbacks suggestion that traditional write-in lines are not long enough. A third column was proposed because the candidates who will be party standard bearers in the general election have already been chosen and certified. There were no discussions or agreements with anyone as to the design of the November 6th ballot. Guam primary election laws are written to permit voters to choose which candidate will carry their party's standard into the general election. With this accomplished, the political parties have the right to request that the line for write-in candidates bear no party affiliation, as the electorate has identified who will represent the two parties. Election commissioners are mandated by law, first of all, to ensure that the elections are fair, honest, and accessible to eligible and qualified electors, and are conducted in accordance with applicable laws. The commissioners must also ensure the interests and rights of the parties who they represent are voiced and respected. And he goes on to talk about 4 teams and the results, etc. And why there shouldn't be a recount, etc. But really, I tend to give more weight to what Ken Leon Guerrero says as opposed to what Curious Ken says, because he says himself that the parties have the right to ask that there be a neutral column for write-in voters. So why did the ballot get changed? I suppose we'll never find out, because, you know, if the Daily News were writing about the Election Commission, they'd use that language that I zeroed in on. Where was it? One of the critical components of representative democracy is openness. Well, the Election Commission is anything but open. It's kind of like they do what they feel like doing and really don't seem to hold themselves accountable to anybody except perhaps the leadership of the party that appoints them. So once again, and on the card here, GEC versus stupidity. Stupidity won again with this idea that if people wrote in Frank and Alicia, if one person wrote in Frank and Alicia on the Democrat side and another wrote in on the Republican side, that's only one vote for Frank and Alicia. You don't have to you don't have to be a Phi Beta Kappa to work on that one. Just your common sense. And according to the lead into this show, we have a lot of common sense here. You don't need much, really, to decide that particular question. So the next item on the card is Tenorio and Lou LG versus unborn children. And this particular issue has apparently finally been joined. You'll recall last Sunday, as a matter of fact, a Catholic group held rallies in front of 7 churches on Sunday morning, and according to the news reports, hundreds of people were involved. And I said on Monday, I said, you know, with that many people involved, I'm surprised that it isn't part of the political discourse here, because hundreds of voters is hundreds of voters. And you'd think that with respect to those who were out on the street demonstrating, it wouldn't be hard to develop some campaign materials that would appeal to those voters. But so far, it has not been an issue. I said, well, as luck would have it, probably at the very time I was speaking, Ray Tenorio was making one of his serial appointments at the pretrial services office of the Superior Court. And when he emerged from the pretrial services office, he took advantage of the presence of the media to trot out some of his talking points. And one of the things he said was that he was protecting the rights of the unborn. And I opined that Leon Guerrero has pretty much presented herself as being pro-abortion. Now, we spent a little time talking about the desire of people to use euphemisms there, that we want to talk about pro-choice and pro-life, because it's politically more correct than using that ugly A word, abortion. which means killing an unborn child in the womb. People don't like the sound of that. So especially the pro-choicers, instead of saying, I think every woman has the right to have an abortion if she wants to, it's more like, I believe a woman has a right to choose. So that's what happened last week. And there have been some new developments here. Ray on his show made reference to Bill 195-32 and a dialogue between Lou and I can't remember who, where Lou was kind of pinned down on the question, are you pro-life or pro-choice? And Lou said, well, that's not the only issue in the campaign. And Ray's rejoinder was, well, there are a lot of other things that you probably want to talk about, but that is the issue in the campaign, or that's going to be the issue in the campaign. So then I got curious, and I dug out Bill 195, and I have it here with me, and I dug out Lou's testimony on Bill 195. But before I get to that, I would mention a couple of other things. I'm looking at an ad that appeared in the Post, and I'm going to hold it up for you Facebookers. And if I can hold it in the right place there, this is always tricky because the image on the screen moves the opposite way that you move the paper. Anyhow, there's a picture of a child in utero and a baby, and the top of the ad said, how can Lou claim to protect Guam's most vulnerable if she won't protect the unborn? And then there's some more language in the ad. So it's pretty clear that Ray Tenorio has picked up the cudgel. Pretty good at picking up stuff anyhow, isn't he? On the abortion debate. And then Sunday night, I went down to the Frank Ogden and Alicia Limtiaco rally. And I always use these rallies, these political rallies, as a rejoinder to the statement that there's no such thing as a free lunch. There is if you want to go and listen to the oftentimes boring political speeches, then there is a free lunch. So I listened to Frank and Alicia, and I've got a report here on Frank's remarks, if I could just find it. Just bear with me for a second here. This is a pretty good remark.
Grilled salmon, petite sirloin. Can't decide.
What are you doing?
Making my top 10 list of favorite dishes at Ruby Tuesday.
You really need to get a hobby.
But I can't decide. There's no way I can narrow down so many classic dishes to just 10.
Then it's a good thing Ruby Tuesday did it for you.
It's the all-time favorites menu at Ruby Tuesday Guam. We took our most popular dishes and put them on one great menu for only $14.99. Hickory pork chop, Parmesan shrimp pasta, prime loco moco, 10 top sellers at one great price. Pick your favorite for a limited time at Ruby Tuesday Guam.
Boy, that seventh inning stretch came just at the right time, didn't it, real Joe Cruz?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Well, while everybody else was out there in the center field bleachers of Wrigley Field admiring the growth of that green ivy on the walls and perhaps sipping on an adult beverage, I actually found what I was looking for. And this is a report that appeared in the Pacific Daily News. And I'm going to read a little bit of it. It's mostly quotes from Frank Uggan. This is what Frank says. This is something we're making clear tonight. There's no political party that is more important than the people of Guam. Make no mistake about it. My duty to the party ends where my duty to the people begins, Uggan said. That's pretty standard, right? Uggan criticized Leon Guerrero on stage without mentioning her name, but described her as his opponent. And this is what he said. Do you want a leader who believes that abortion is the way to building a community? Should we put our faith in a person who said no to building a home for foster children in her neighborhood? Can we allow more power in the hands of our opponent who pledges she's going to give the wealthy another tax break? How can we want to do this how can we want to do this after President Trump already gave business a huge tax break? So for Frank Uggan, it is in his list of issues, it's number one. Do we want a leader who believes that abortion is the way to building a community? So, as I said, the issue is now joined. And in addition to those remarks, after both Frank and Alicia had spoken, Narissa Underwood took the stage to make a few brief remarks before she blessed the table. And Narissa, a staunch Democrat, former officer of the Democrat Party, former Democrat senator, made no bones about the ability of a person or the how would I say it, made no bones about what a person who favors abortion is all about as to what that person's priorities are. And it's pretty hard, according to her, pretty hard to make an argument fly that you're for the people when you're in favor of abortion. So I guess I would have to say that for the Uggan Limtiaco campaign, there is a strong anti-abortion plank in whatever platform they are putting forward. As far as Lilian Guerrero is concerned, she hasn't, as far as I know, spoken to the issue at all. But after Ray mentioned Bill 195-32, I got curious and I dug it up. And the title of the bill is the Infant Child's Right to Life Act. And I'll just read the statement of legislative findings and intent. Legislature finds that a proposal was previously introduced in a prior legislature that would protect the life of a child who is brought into this world through the abortion process and who, upon extraction from the mother's womb, is found to still be alive. The legislature recognizes that a child in this situation who is found to be alive must be preserved, and every effort must be made to protect the child's life. Therefore, it is the intent of the legislature to enact legislation that would require that in such cases whereupon an infant that, through an abortion process, is found to be alive, that life must be recognized as a human being and thus must be extended the right to life. And I won't read the rest of the bill. It's long. It's got criminal penalties in it. It's a fairly comprehensive bill. So after I read the bill over during that long hiatus, during that long swearing off period of tall tales, I just couldn't restrain myself, and I wanted to start doing show prep, even though there'd be no show until Monday. So I got the committee report for public law, as you were for Bill 195, and I found Lou Leon Guerrero's testimony in that committee report, and I'll read parts of it here. I suppose we should send Lou a rate card here for all of the name recognition she's getting here on Tall Tales, but it is an issue, and she is a candidate, and one of the important things that we do here on Tall Tales is discuss the issues and the people who are connected to the issues. So about the third sentence, she says, as I read the bill, what was glaring to me is that you, meaning senators, are now walking into the realm of medical practice that is not your area of expertise. By passing this bill, you are saying to me and allowing a special interest group to say that you and they know better than the experts in obstetrics, family practice, pediatrics, neonatology, and medicine. By way of this bill, you have taken the discretion, the responsibility, the acumen, and the judgment of that medical professional who is on the ground experiencing the circumstances and is more equipped to make the decisions. There are medical standards vetted through scientific research and medical knowledge that govern the practice of doctors and guide them in making their decisions. By way of this bill, you have said to our doctors, who are well respected and highly regarded in our community, we have no confidence in your ability. This bill not only diminishes the medical... Now remember what we're talking about here. And this is a little graphic. We should have one of those black warnings on the screen. What we're talking about here is a botched abortion, that a child that was meant to be aborted, and the abortion failed. So instead of being aborted, the child came out of the mother's womb alive, and apparently is laying there on the delivery table alive. And the question is, well, what happens in the case that a child, after a botched abortion, is born alive? And Bill 195-32 says you have to keep it alive. But Lou is saying, no, that's not right. You have to, the better view would be to allow the medical profession to exercise its judgment. Let's see. By way of this bill, you have said that our doctors, etc., this not only diminishes the medical profession, but further carries them onto jail by criminalizing them if they refuse to abide by the mandate. And the mandate in the bill is, if the child is born alive, keep him alive. Don't kill him. By way of this bill, you have affirmed that doctors who have committed aggravated murder, and for that crime, we will put you in jail for life. And by the way, you will rot. It's a good. I guess Lou is not running for poet laureate of Guam here, given the phraseology of her letter. By way of this bill, you have affirmed that doctor that to have committed aggravated murder, And for that crime, we will put you in jail for life. And by the way, you will rot in jail because you are not eligible for parole, work release, or educational programs outside the confines of the prison. If this bill passes, we as a community, through your representation, will have mandated a government policy that ignores medical expertise and puts not only doctors, but our nurses, medical assistants, and our physician's assistants and any health provisions present in that event in jail. I'm going to skip a little bit here. This bill is very anti-quality of life. I got to repeat that. This bill is very anti-quality of life because it does not consider the expense that the family will recur as a result of mandating treatment that most likely will not result in a quality of life outcome for the child. Now, I don't know enough about the discipline here, but does that mean that a child who survives an abortion is going to be a little more expensive to raise than one who didn't survive an abortion? Instead, what this bill does will burden the family with enormous medical bills. I know that some will say you cannot put a price tag on life and money should not be a factor. But the reality of the situation is the family, the government does not have the human and economic resource to provide care that is required to sustain a life that medical science will tell you is not living a quality of life, not living a quality of life. So if you're not living a quality of life, if the child is not living a quality of life, well, then maybe it shouldn't be living at all. This kind of harkens back to the theories of eugenics that were popular around the turn of the last century. And then she wraps it up by saying, lastly, I would like to make this comment. We all have a greater challenge. We all have a greater challenge in our island. The community is more concerned on how we can decrease unemployment rate of 13.3%. We are very concerned on how we can work together to provide more jobs because our job growth has been stagnant over the last 5 years. So we're more concerned about that than what happens to the child who, because of a botched abortion, survives the abortion. And then she goes on with some more, pretty much the same things. So the social ills that we are dealing with here in our community. She says most of the voters did not vote for you based on whether you are pro-choice or pro-life. Please, let's get back on track to the more compelling issues at hand. Issues that are more compelling than whether or not babies, unborn children should be killed. Please, let's get back on track to the more compelling issues at hand that have a greater impact on the quality of life of our people. I ask that when you are considering this bill to seriously consider the negative consequences of this piece of legislation as I had enumerated. Please talk to as many people as you feel necessary. Talk to the experts that can give you factual and objective information. I trust that you will do your due diligence, and I know that you will act in favor of the greater good of our community. So if it's a matter of individual rights or the greater good of the community, it's the greater good of the community that has to carry the day. I've heard that kind of philosophical enumeration before. Where was that? It's kind of like this page I couldn't find. It'll come to me probably before the program's open, but if it occurs to you, you can go ahead and post it. And so, in doing so, you will arrive to the conclusion that this bill should not pass. So that's Lou's testimony on that very I thought, touching bill. But I'm just expressing my own opinion here. Let me see what's going on here on Facebook. The sick and elderly and disabled on Guam better fear that statement that they are burdens. Yeah, and that's this idea of what's good for the community. Forget about the individual; it's the community that counts. And then Jose says, "How about talk to the babies?" And then, of course, the theory. That wasn't the theory I was looking for. Jose, eugenics, but of course eugenics was rather popular at the beginning of the 20th century. Not so much now, except on the left. I think we've aborted 49 million people in the United States since Roe versus Wade passed. That was the last time I heard. I suspect it's higher than that now. And then Jose says it was public testimony of a private view. Yeah, maybe so. But anyhow, once a person testifies before the legislature for good or for not so good, that sticks with you. You're going to have a hard time distancing yourself from it because it is a public document. And nowadays, there was a time if you wanted to see a committee report, it would almost be a part-time job to bird dog it and find somebody who would actually hunt it down for you. And especially back in the days when we didn't have Xerox machines. But nowadays, legislature is pretty good about putting that stuff online. And it's not hard to find the things that people said when they testified for or against various bills. And this is Lou's testimony on the, what was the name of that bill? I had it here just a second ago. Infant Child's Right to Life Act. An Infant Child's Right to Life Act. So once again, I couldn't find something right away, and the real Joe in a very timely fashion determined that it was break time. So we're going to take a break here, and then we're going to come back for the home stretch on Tall Tales.
It's important to have claims process that works for you. At Guahan Insurance Services, we make things simple and convenient. Same door you walk in to purchase your insurance is the same door you open to file your claim. We can't pretend that the car insurance claims process is fun, but we can promise a hassle-free and speedy recovery without any runarounds. For your home, auto, and business insurance, visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center on Marine Corps Drive in Tamuning. Don't forget to like us on Facebook or give us a call at 475-1162 or text 929-SAVE. That's 929-7283.
Program, and guess who's on the line? Our Carl. Hello, our Carl. Yeah, our Carl, the very one. Hello, our Carl. Are you there, Carl? Oh, there you go. Hello there, our Carl.
Oh, there you are.
Yes, sir.
Hey, Bob. Yeah, I've been enjoying the show. I just wanted to chime in. You mentioned a figure of, I forget what it was, 40 whatever million estimated abortions since 1973, since the passing of Roe v. Wade. A few months ago, several months ago, I looked up, just curious how many abortions had happened since then. And according to Wikipedia, and of course it's Wikipedia, so I think it's fairly accurate. But at that time, it was over 63 million.
63 million.
Just to put a little bit of perspective in that, I was also curious about another figure, how many people were killed during World War II. And there's a really excellent video presentation, just fantastic presentation called The Fallen of World War II on YouTube. And it presents a visual representation of how many, just a staggering number of people were killed. It was over 70 million. So the number of children whose lives have been terminated is approaching the number of casualties in World War II.
Wow.
And, you know, some people have brought up, well, it's easy for you to moralize about it. You know, it's not easy raising kids and the 9 months. And, you know, I was there during 3 of my wife's deliveries. Believe me, if men had to give birth, there would be a lot of single-child families in this world. I think we'd all have single-child families. It was just the most incredible experience of my life, so I'm well aware of that. I used to work for, give or take, about a year with Child Welfare Services on Guam. I was a social worker. I dealt with the adoption section. I interviewed prospective parents and relatives that wanted to adopt kids. And the really sad thing is there are millions and millions of families and couples in America with kids and without who would love to have kids. They're desperately looking for kids. They're going to foreign countries trying to adopt kids. So it's just sad that we can't do a better job of matching these up. And one final thought, if as you would have liked to have seen, as I would have liked to have seen, if the question of abortion had gone to the states as I would have liked to have seen it happen, and I just wonder how many children could have been spared just from that. You know, having not having it illegal, but having it somewhat limited. Some states would have it, others would decide not to have it. You know, would that be 1 million lives saved, 2 million, 3 million? You know, we'll never know.
Well, that's the way it was.
That's the cost of legislating from the bench.
That's the way it was before Roe versus Wade. That what Roe versus Wade was about was states' attempt to criminalize various parts of the abortion scheme. And some states had laws that would criminalize a doctor's performing an abortion. And then Roe versus Wade said you can't do that because it interferes with a woman's right to privacy. So the states lost all control over that. So I objected to Roe versus Wade. I didn't need to get into the real issue. I object to it on the basis of federalism, that criminal laws dealing with individual conduct are matters of state law, and the national government shouldn't get involved. And then, of course, you've heard my rants about the Supreme Court, that when 7 guys on the Supreme Court found the right of privacy, it really turned the whole constitutional scheme upside down, and the result has been, what, 63 million deaths?
Yeah, according to that Wikipedia article at the time. And you know, to put a human face on this, there's another really excellent video. It's about less than 10 minutes long. I think it's about 9 minutes and some seconds. It's by a lady named Gianna Jessen. Her last name is Jessen. Her first name is Gianna, Gianna Jessen. And she survived, at 7.5 months, she survived I believe it was what they call a saline abortion. They inject some kind of saline solution in the amniotic sac, and it causes the baby to abort. But she survived. And I think she looked in her late 20s, maybe early 30s. But it's just a remarkable thing. The title of it is Gianna Jessen, Abortion Survivor, I think, in Australia. She did a speech, and it got a lot of views. I think it got over 1 million views. But it's just a remarkable thing, you know, when you see what happens when a child does survive, and what happens when that life isn't terminated. That kind of puts a human face on it. Anyway, I appreciated your comments and your show. It's very interesting. After hearing Lou's comments about abortion, her testimony about speaking out against allowing children who have survived abortion to still be terminated, I was just shaking my head. I mean, I don't get that, you know. So this is a very tough election. I'm finding things I can criticize on, you know, just about all the candidates. It's really going to be tough for me to decide.
I think elections were a lot easier before tall tales came along, Carl.
Yes, you're making it very hard, and your callers too. You're making it very tough on me. So anyway, I do appreciate your thoughts, and it always stimulates my thinking. You know, the comments on the Facebook page. Always enjoy it.
Okay, thanks for calling, Carl, and I'll take it from here to the end of the show. But I know you're willing to help. Thanks again.
Yeah, and I hope you take me seriously about that. You know, you and Real Joe, you know, coming in on Saturdays and Sundays and holidays, you know. Just bring futons. Just live there.
Thanks for your help, Carl. So, Real Joe Cruz, I thought I saw something like a sardonic grin on your face as Carl made that proposal.
I got a life too. Tall Tales is a big part of my life, but I have a little bit of time off every now and then.
Yeah,
it's nice.
It's probably against my better judgment, but I'll allow it, Real Joe Cruz. Okay, so I've got just about 4 minutes to go here, and I can just start on something here in a new subject. Tom Fisher versus the press. And Tom Fisher has written a letter to the Attorney General asking that the case against Ray Tenorio be dismissed. And Fisher accused McDonald of choosing to submit the charges to the Superior Court after the primary election and weeks before the general election, despite the fact that the statute of limitations for a misdemeanor is 1 year and a felony 3 years. And then he quibbles a little bit with the language of the complaint, and he says that back to the story, Tenorio was charged with reckless conduct with a firearm, obstruction of government functions, and official misconduct. He pleaded not guilty and waived his right to a speedy trial. Fisher alleges 3 sources confirmed they knew about the existence of the criminal charges days before the filing, and 1 individual reported that the source of the information came from the office of the Attorney General. Fisher indicated he intends to report the actions of Collins, the prosecutor, McDonald, the chief prosecutor, and their agents to the office of the ethics prosecutor of the Guam Bar Association, and said prosecutors are not immune from civil actions for, quote, malicious prosecution. So this is potentially pretty heavy duty, and I'll probably put it near the top of the card for tomorrow. But Tom Fisher, the lawyer for Ray Tenorio, is saying that 3 different people have told him that the charges were ready to go but didn't, suggesting the kind of timing that Fisher is criticizing. So I'm going to come back to that tomorrow. Pretty interesting. And probably see what silly things the Election Commission and the CLTC does tomorrow. I probably won't put those on the top of the card, but it's kind of dependable. So thanks a lot for tuning in out there in our international radio listening audience, and I'll see you tomorrow.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
What to do about